episode 9 on Heading West, where we bring you the frontier of Web 2 and Web 3. On today's episode, we have Erika Brickey as our guest, and this episode is going to be focused on being a woman in venture capital today. So, Erika, thanks so much for being on.
Hi, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for having me, Hunter.
Of course, super excited to dive in. You definitely have an incredible track record, especially being at just 24 years old. So to kick things off, though, I'd love to hear about your story, how you kind of got into VC and what was the passion behind that.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. I definitely had a non-traditional path to get to venture. I went to UCLA for undergrad, studied political science, which I feel like is kind of random. And while I was there, I actually got a job working at Tinder in their marketing department. I was an intern back in 2016 and 2017. And it was like really a blast. So that was my first kind of like foray into tech. I had no previous really marketing experience at all. I helped them build the campus ambassador program, which was super awesome. And they actually ended up giving me a college scholarship, which is what allowed me to actually stay at UCLA when I got later into undergrad. Tinder gave me $50,000. So that is probably like my best and biggest accomplishment to date. And after I worked there, I went to work at a cybersecurity startup, or not a startup at all, a big tech company, in fact, called Palo Alto Networks. At the time, my first internship, I think we had 4,000 employees. By the time I left as a full-time employee, we had 10,000. So it grew really fast in the time I was there. And I interned there for 2 summers, first year in recruiting and the second summer in supply chain. And then I went back there after I finished at UCLA to work in new products supply chain. So I did materials management and program management. So we were prototyping firewalls, which a political science major working on hardware firewall prototypes probably sounds a little ridiculous. And I would agree. That was crazy. I don't know how I ended up there. It was really one of those things that you just kind of arrive to and have to figure it out. And I spent a year there living in San Francisco. Didn't really like it. Decided to quit the Bay Area and move back to LA in 2021. And I went to a healthcare startup in Venice Beach. I did that for about a year. I had to leave because there were some crazy startup things that happened. And I ended up landing at Operate. I met one of our partners, who's now my co founder, Mallory, and she hired me within a week. So I feel super lucky that that happened. And now I'm here.
No, I love it. Definitely a really interesting story. I love the Tinder aspect. That is definitely
Oh,
a
yeah.
keeper.
It's the best thing I've ever done.
Landing at where you are now, Operate, would love if you can kind of give the listeners or viewers an in-depth look and, kind of what are you guys focusing on over at Operate and what kind of different sectors you guys focus on within, venture capital and startups.
So, Operate is an early stage venture fund and venture studio. We are currently in the midst of our third fund since being founded in late 2019, early 2020. We invest in early stage tech startups, primarily software, but we are what some would call a generalist fund. So, we do not have any specific niche or target. This allows us to really choose very intentionally on what we would like to invest in. We would consider ourselves like a founder's first fund. So a lot of the teams we've invested in, we've really put a lot of stock in the folks that are building the company, and we've seen a lot of these founders pivot into super exciting stuff. So I really love seeing that. We are also a venture studio, so that means we build our own companies, and we've been working on one for almost the past year. It's called Bonus. It is a property tech startup. I'm super excited about it. If you want to check it out, you can go to bonushomes.com. We launched in Phoenix, and we just publicly launched just the company itself only maybe 2 months ago. So it's been super fun getting to do that. And we're like really changing things in real estate markets. So that's what I'm stoked on. But yeah, that's a little bit about what we do.
No, that's awesome. Definitely excited to take a look at Bonus. And then I'm curious, just because in my opinion, VC is a very daunting sector or professional field. So what advice would you have for, other females or anyone else in general looking to break into VC?
I think, there are a couple of paths people can take. I think the most common road to venture, I would say, is probably coming from like a high finance background, investment banking, private equity, etc., maybe even corporate finance. But I think that there's also another path, which is the startup founder or like startup operator to venture, which is kind of what I did. So I was the first sales hire at a healthcare startup, helped build the organization. I had, 20 something direct reports. I was only 23. Like I had a lot of operating experience. I got super lucky to be able to do that. And so that's what made me qualified to come work at a fund. Um, but I think, you know, venture is really changing and evolving, and there are a lot of venture funds that are newer, more like emerging, that have really different sets of like, I would say like mission and values, like the prophecies are different. The OGs like Sequoia and Andreessen Horowitz, like those are what would be considered like tier one funds, and they operate really similarly to like an investment bank. But emerging funds have a lot more fluidity in terms of LP construction. So that means who invests in it and the types of investments they can make. A lot of emerging funds invest in earlier stages, which is like really cool, I think, because getting to be on like the ground floor of a company being built is really cool. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think you just like really have to make yourself known and be seen. Either that's by the people you work for now or people in your industry. Uh, but it's not as daunting as it seems because there are actually a lot of really nice people in it. You just got to know where to find them.
Yeah, no, definitely a lot of value there, and definitely want to agree with you in regards to just finding the right people in across any profession. Curious, so when it comes to emerging funds, what would you say is like the major pro for someone that's entering VC? Is it just like having that startup culture, that new environment? Are they more lenient? Kind of what does that look like?
I often tell people when they're like graduating college that they should go work at a startup instead of a big tech company if they want to work in tech, mostly because you get a ton of ownership on your decisions. So when I was at Palo Alto Networks, it was a really big company. We had 10,000 employees. I was in an organization of, 200 people. I had to follow so many steps and protocols to get anything done, and it was the most infuriating thing ever. And then I left and I went to a startup, and I was the 13th employee, and I got to do whatever I wanted within reason. And I'm not saying like take time off or slack off at work, but I got to be the owner of my decisions and my org, and what I decided drove the business. And it's the same with an emerging fund. So an emerging fund is essentially a newer venture fund, either in their first, second, or third fund that they've raised. Oftentimes, they're making smaller investments. They are constantly fundraising. They're testing out new strategies, and they don't have like tons of institutional knowledge and connections, and it's a lot scrappier of an environment. And so when you go work at an emerging fund, it's the same as working at a startup. You have to own so much extra stuff, and that's what I get to do now. I feel super fortunate because I've aged in dog years working at Operate. Like had I gone to be an analyst at like a big fund, I'd be writing investment memos and like looking at financial plans and doing a lot of due diligence, and that is all really good practice. But not only do I do that now, I also get to source deals, I get to fundraise from LPs, I get to represent the fund at events. Like I am a trusted resource to my portfolio companies. I help manage the portfolio. Like I get to do all of this stuff that if I was at a really big fund, like I would not get to interact with most of those touch points at all.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, personally, with me working in a startup, I think people, some alpha for anyone listening or watching is working in a startup, you gain light years of experience compared to working
Totally.
at, a Fortune 100 company, whatnot. Super interesting there. And then I'm curious as well, what would you say like is Operate's thesis? As I don't personally work in venture capital, but online capital raising, kind of similar sectors per se. But what is your guys' thesis for your guys' fund itself? And then what's the main thing you look for in founders? As I know, I think from the outside perspectives, a lot of people are like, people are investing in companies, but a huge part of being in VC, I think, is investing in the founder themselves. So would love if you can kind of touch on that and highlight those distinctions.
So we say, like, this is like our creed essentially, but we invest in founders we love working on problems that we can get excited about. Excuse me, I'm drinking a sparkling water. I'm going to burp on this
No
podcast.
worries, do it.
Oh my God, please edit it out. No, I'm just kidding. Uh, so we invest in founders we love working on problems that we can get excited about. And I think for us, that really does mean like founders that we want to work with for the next 5 to 10 years, because that is a relationship in venture. It's usually 7 years on average that an investor kind of waits until there's a final day, either an exit or an IPO, or like some kind of finality of the relationship, either closing their doors, running out of money, etc. But I would also go a little further to say we're very much like a founders first fund. So we do invest primarily in the founders, not necessarily in the idea or technology as much. Obviously, we're going to analyze like a deal like we would at any other investor would. So market size, whether or not they have a plan, if they have any traction, etc. But if we really, really like the founder and we believe that this founder is going to be able to figure out a way to make this company profitable or take it to the next level, well, we are likely to take that risk if we think they're like that awesome. But I would say we do have more interests just like in terms of our individual passions in fintech, property tech, and real estate. We love gaming and gaming infrastructure. We've had a lot of fun with our gaming investments. And then I personally am really interested in like CPG tech and retail tech, not necessarily e-com, but more like IRL retail tech. So
Yeah,
that's just kind of our cute list.
no, it's a great list. Some really exciting sectors. And then I'm curious too, just because I work on more of the equity crowdfunding on my capital raising side,
Yeah.
how do you see those two differentiate? And then do you see those kind of becoming more embedded over the next few years, just with how the world of online capital raising is growing, equity crowdfunding, and allowing investors, customers to become investors within companies that are looking to raise capital?
So I actually think about this all the time. Private market investing is like so mystical. And I have some friends that are building this like insane AI community in San Francisco. And they texted me yesterday and they were like, yo, Erika, you're coming to the city this weekend. Can we talk about what it's like to raise a micro fund? And I was like, yes, like I'll come up with some ideas. And I get a text back. He's this founder who's raised, I think, like 300 or 500K for a startup in the past, which is just like that's a lot of money, but it's not that much money in the grand scheme. So that's just where I'm going to start here. And I said, okay, so do you want it to be like $1 million? And then he responds, no, I want it to be 10 million. So that way we can make like $1 million bets. And I was like, it's going to take you like 3 years to raise a $10 million venture fund, right? Like you don't know anybody. Like founders who raise from VCs literally don't know how it works. And that to me is like very problematic. Like it needs to be way more transparent. And like because these founders are asking us for money to invest in them, put our names on their cap table, like be with them for 7 years, and they don't know how our fund structure works, how we raise capital, what kind of returns we need to get from their investments. Like they just think we're giving them this wire, this check, and that's not really what it's like.
Yeah.
And I feel like equity crowdfunding is like so the opposite. And I think a lot of VCs have had like kind of like a poor taste, like kind of like a ooh, like equity crowdfunding is like a not a good thing air about it. And I feel like those are things that can really work in tandem. Like stonks.com, for example, is like a situation where I feel like people who are accredited or non-accredited investors can invest in tech startups. But it's just, I want to see more people investing in private markets, whether that's through equity crowdfunding or RUVs and SPVs. I also would love for the SEC to get rid of the accredited investor requirement. That's my dream. I'm not an accredited investor, so I technically cannot angel invest in a traditional round, and that bothers me because
Yeah.
I do, but I can't.
No, I love that you brought that up because I would love if they remove that requirement because I would be investing quite a bit more in some super fun startups that I'm pretty passionate
Right.
about.
I can't invest in a
Like,
startup unless they're doing like an RUV or an SPV, and not
yeah.
everybody has enough people to like to do like the $50,000 RUV requirement, I don't think. So it's like, what
It's
am I
very
supposed to do?
no, exactly. I mean, I think they should adjust the rules. I mean, at least the requirements of what it means to be accredited, especially with just like the economy in whole and where everything's at. So it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, no, I think you touched on some really good points. But I know you have built an incredible community, so that's something I definitely want to touch on as we're trying to build one here
Okay.
at Heading West. What are some things has really propelled you in regards to VC, your personal brand, and overall your career that you've been doing on Twitter, been doing in real life events around Los Angeles, and anything else that you may be doing that's contributing to your success so far?
So when I started my job, my GP, Kyle, GP is general partner for any newbies to VC, by the way. I just want to give you that info. Kyle said, you need to be on Twitter. And I was like, I've had my Twitter since high school. Like, there's some stuff on there that people probably should not see. Like, I don't think I should tweet you guys. That sounds really dumb. And then he was like, no, I'm serious. Like, go follow Twitter investors. And I was like, all right. And so he gave me a list of a handful of people. And I was like, started reading threads. And then Launch House, which is one of our portfolio companies, did like a sprint for Twitter. I only went to the first meeting because the first meeting was free and I didn't want to pay for the rest of it because I'm a cheapskate. And so I followed a bunch of investors on Twitter, and that was like maybe in the summertime. And then in August, LA had LA Tech Week, and I went to like probably 15 events in 6 days. I was networking my little tush off. I met so many people, shook so many hands, listened to so many pitches. It was crazy. And I realized while I was doing that, that I, one, like actually had kind of started to know what I was talking about in venture. At that point, I'd been at my job for like 3 or 4 months. And I was like, oh, okay, like I can hold my own in this conversation. And two, like there are so many interesting people to meet, both online and in real life, that I would be like grossly missing out if I didn't put in that effort. And so I started tweeting. I remember I tweeted my first thread during Tech Week, and I just kind of became like addicted to being on Twitter, not necessarily like writing like super think boy content. Like I'm not like, here are 10 ways to level up and like here are the 3 lessons I learned
Yeah.
in founding a startup. Like that's not my brand, but I started putting myself out there, like talking about deals and cold emails I got that I liked and cold emails I got that I didn't like, and what it was like trying to fundraise when you don't know what you're doing, and like platform VC roles, which is technically what I started as, which is like fund admin, portfolio management, events, that sort of thing. Um, and, like learning how to analyze a deal in real time. Like I didn't know how to ask the right questions to founders, and I still am learning how to ask better questions. And so I started writing tweets, and suddenly my tweets started getting a lot of attention. And I happened like overnight. Like I tweet stuff that's in my mind. Like I was talking with you the other day at an event, and you were like,
Yeah.
"Oh, like I don't know what I should post. Like I feel like your content is just so natural." And I'm like, "It's because I don't give it a second thought."
Hmm.
I like wake up, I get out my thumbs, and I like post tweet. I tweeted about like dating apps this morning, and this article I saved 5 years ago when I was working at Tinder that said Silicon Valley singles are over the algorithms of love. And I tweeted about it this morning
That's so good.
because I was like, yeah, I'm still over them. And then just before we got on this interview, I ranted on my Twitter about how there's now like an entire dating economy because creators online and authors and people who sell courses are capitalizing on these poor, sad single people that can't get dates on these dating apps. Poor, sad single people being me. I listen to dating podcasts, and I'm like, I was driving to work this morning, and I was like, I am a victim of this capitalism. Like, oh my God. Like, I had like an epiphany, and I just ranted about that on Twitter. I don't know if it's going to get any attention, but like, my thoughts become tweets. And I think that is a very long winded way to say my brand online has been like very authentic because it's just me. like, I'm just being myself. Like, I'm kind of a dork, and I say silly jokes that maybe aren't, like, that funny, but they're funny enough, and I really like talking about work, and so I do all of that stuff online, and it's gotten me, now over 5,000 followers. In August, during Tech Week, I had, like, 500, and, that wasn't that long ago. I hit 3,000 in December, and so, like, this is a big deal, and I'm really proud of it, and I feel super fortunate to have, like, the kind of social capital, I guess, online, but it's been really fun to build that network and write.
I think you definitely touched on some good points. I mean, I think building social capital like today has never been more important, and especially in like
Seriously.
your line of work, like being in VC and like myself, like online capital raising, even like sales, coding, engineering, a bunch of different sectors. But in my opinion, like how I view someone's like socials across, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever it may be, is like that's like your digital cover letter. Personally, I don't think cover letters are going to be a thing for many more years to come. As when you're like applying for that next job, I think coming in with like a Twitter following, if you're into sales or B2B to enterprise software, VC, online capital raising, just shows a tremendous amount of like who you are, the work you put in outside of your professional career. So I definitely think social capital is only going to grow and become more valuable. So definitely glad we touched on that. And then I also would
I
love to
love that.
hear.
I wrote it down. I'm literally gonna post about that on LinkedIn, like,
Yeah,
tomorrow.
no, it's good. I mean, my thing with like social and even like heading west is like, in my opinion, it's hard to be like vulnerable. I think I always try and be authentic, but I think people that excel on social across any other platform is like the ability to be vulnerable. And that's something like, I think takes time for people to learn. So that's something, we're working on internally over here, but we'll get there. And then,
Yeah, I I have a newsletter also that I built on Beehive. Shout out Beehive. Heading West is also built on Beehive, just in case anyone who's listening does not subscribe to either of our newsletters, you should do that. But I am really well practiced in the art of being vulnerable. I think I don't really know how it started. I feel like I've mostly always been this way. I did pageants when I was in high school, which sounds crazy, but a big part of pageants is interviews, and my skill was always being able to, like, weave my personal story into all of my answers, and, I did really excel at that. Sounds I cannot believe I just said that bit while being recorded, but I did do them. If you Google my name, you will find pictures of me with a crown on. Oh my god. I'm having, like, in real time regrets, but
do
I
good.
don't know, I don't mind sharing some stuff that I think other people, like, would maybe be afraid to share, and there's definitely stuff that I will always keep private, but, I find, like, if last week I wrote on my newsletter about imposter syndrome and how when I got to college, like, I was, like, really shocked by everybody and how much wealth they had and all of the things they had done before, and I was really trapped in comparing myself to them and how when I started working in VC, it was the same thing all over again, and I figured out a way to overcome that, and I thought, "Why shouldn't I share this with people? It might help somebody," and that's kind of, like, my mindset.
Yeah, no, it's definitely the right mindset to have. I feel like if you can, help anybody provide value in any capacity, it's something you should do. And I'm a firm believer in like anything that goes around does come around, especially on social. Like you never know what that comment, that interaction is going to bring, because you never
Mhm.
know, who that person is behind their profile, the connections they have, the opportunities that they may want to give to you. So definitely the right mindset there. Kind of going back to like the VC realm, what are some main obstacles in your opinion when it comes to like being a female in VC? I'm just curious on my end and for anyone
I
listening.
think I think it is both the fact that I'm a woman and that I'm really young, right? So
Mhm.
I'm 24. I also work at a small fund, which essentially garners, like, less respect for some people. Just today, Keith Raboy from Open Door, like, huge VC, big successful rich founder in Miami, replied to a tweet by this woman named Nicole Wiskoff, who is in her early 30s and raised a $20 million venture fund all by herself, solo GP. And he replied to her tweet and essentially called her like a third tier VC. And like she by herself raised all this money, and she wasn't like some founder with some big exit. Like she was an operator and put in this big GP commitment and like hustled. And you know, that I think is like what the experience is, right? Like she's a woman, he's this like famous venture guy, and he just shit on her publicly in front of everybody for no reason other than to be mean. And it's kind of like that. Like I always feel like people sometimes like scoff at me or like kind of like roll their eyes at what I do because I do it on like a smaller scale. Um, but ultimately, and I kind of said this before, the right people in venture are going to like really admire that and be excited that you're in the space. And I think the old ways are in many ways on their way out. Like those people who are, they might be really rich and really successful and have made a lot of good investment decisions, but culturally they're not like with the times. And I think startups, because they're so innovative, are really evolving from like a team perspective and founder expectation perspective. And, a lot of these newer funds still have a ways to go in terms of like proving that they've made the right investment decisions. But I think in like 10 years, things will look a lot different. So, just got to ignore the haters.
It's hard to, but I mean, they're always going to be in any professional field that you work in and across
Yeah.
life. But just putting them to the side and focusing on you, your goals and objective is going to be the most important thing. But that was a really good share, though. It's interesting. I mean, Twitter's a very like great place, and also it could be like a dangerous place at the same time. But would love to hear about any new ventures you're working on. I believe you have a consulting business, if I remember correctly, that you're going to be rolling
Yes.
out. So would love for you to share with anyone that's watching or listening.
Yeah. So Mallory Maskey and Mallory is the Chief People Officer of Bonus and a general partner in the fund with me. Uh, Her and I have spent the last few months like really ruminating on this idea that people is the third leg of a startup's stool, meaning that for a really long time, the two things that people would focus on at startups, like in the founding team, was product and revenue. You have to have a really good product and you have to make money in order to succeed. But we've realized that without the right founding team, like no matter the amount of effort you put in to product or selling that product, you could still fail because you have the wrong team implementing it and trying to, accomplish those goals. And so we kind of came up with this term called people debt, which is like really common in startups where you try to hire really fast or hire for like one specific specialization, but then the company evolves and the business needs change and you have to let go of all those people, or they're not as good at performers as you think and the turnover is really high. Like that ultimately causes you to lose money, and also loses momentum. Um, and so we decided to come up with this idea, rather create this business, which holy moly, I still can't believe I can say that. Like this is wild. But we started an agency. So we do recruiting for startups and fractional people leadership. So part-time people leaders to come in, help you build out your people operations, your interviewing, fix your company culture if it needs fixing, prepare you for like a really big stage of growth. So making sure you have all of the things set up to grow, like a talent tracking system and HRIS, and making sure your taxes are all compliant and ensuring that payroll is not going to crap out on you, which is like all the stuff that happens at startups. And, most of the time, you don't hire a full time people leader until you're like way past a certain stage of growth. And we are coming in to kind of service that need before you're ready to go full time and pay for all of that. So that's what we're doing. I'm super excited. It's called People, which is really creative. Thank you for saying that. People powered by Operate. So we're spun out of the venture fund and we're working with portfolio companies and other seed to Series A, Series B startups. It's been super awesome.
No, that's awesome. I absolutely love what you're doing. It's such a good concept too, like partial leadership, like coming into companies part time, like really unique concept. And I think with where the world is and a lot of startups, like you guys have really hit like that product market fit or will be if you have not yet. So that is
Yeah,
awesome.
I mean, we definitely have some clients, but I would love to
Mhm.
get some more. So if anybody is interested or needs help hiring, come to me. Plug, plug.
No, I love it. But that's really it on episode 9. Eric, is there anything else you wanted to touch on? Of
No, but I do wanna say thank you for
course.
having me on here and also for sharing content about capital markets. As I said earlier, it's like a huge mystery and like people like you are making it easier to understand. Hunter has really sick mini threads, he calls them on Twitter, so you should follow him if you don't already. I enjoy reading them.
Well, I appreciate you very much. And everyone that's listening or watching, again, definitely follow Erica. She's building an insane community. And if you're in the Los Angeles area, me and Eric are also looking at potentially doing some like fun events around the west side of Los Angeles, and would love to meet some of you guys in person as well. But thanks again for tuning in to episode 9 of Heading West, and we will see you on the frontier.